Cool. GM everyone, welcome to another Farcaster dev call. I know this is ETH Denver week, so a lot of folks are busy and appreciate you taking the time to join. We have a few topics we want to get through today. We actually have a pretty packed agenda. The goal is to first talk about a lot of the frame tools that have been entering the ecosystem recently. There's a lot of them, so we want to make sure everyone's aware of what's being built, particularly if it makes your life easier in building frames. Second, and sort of the big topic for today, we want to talk about frame transactions. So we have the draft spec, the V2 of the draft spec that we sent out this morning, and we'll kind of go almost line by line and talk through all the comments and open items on this. If there's a good chance that just ends up taking the whole meeting, which is fine. We have some other updates we want to share, and we can bump them to the following week, and I'll send them over cast if needed. But there's some other stuff we wanted to talk about, protocol updates, just stuff going on in Warcast, and a few other changes. So let me kind of cycle back to the beginning. Let's start talking about frame builder tools, and we'll start with David, if you want to jump up and talk about frames, frames.js.
Hello. Thank you, Varun. Just wanted to give a quick update. So we're releasing a bunch of exciting changes today. One of them is we are releasing a library for rendering frames in any app. So if you have a Farcaster client or another app or website where you want to render frames, that's going to be possible starting today. And we actually have two ways of doing this. One is through the library. And the second way we're enabling this is through an iframe. So we have a tool to create iframe frames. And the irony is not lost on me. And in that tool, you can choose whether a signer is needed or not. So if a signer is needed, there's an embedded Farcaster signer flow inside the iframe as well. And so our thesis around this is, if you've built a cool frame and you want to display it on your website or your blog or somewhere else, now it's possible. And we really want to bring frames to the sort of wider web. And then the other changes we have is we've been shipping a bunch of improvements to the debugger. Obviously, Frog launching yesterday is a cool tool, and it's beautiful, and it makes some choices different to the way we've been doing things. So it's up to developers to choose which sort of style they prefer. But yeah, we have a lot of exciting stuff coming, and thank you for your time. We'll leave it there.
Nice. Thanks, David. Yeah, Frames.js has been awesome. They've been building frame tools since day one, and they have a really great awesome frames repo that's a really, really good collection of tools and resources for developers. So if you haven't actually seen the awesome frames, David, I don't know if you want to link it in this chat. I think it's actually been a really helpful resource for a bunch of devs. Sweet. Next up, we have Frog FM. I see Georgios here. Georgios, do you want to maybe step up and say a few words about Frog? And
Frog morning, everybody. Thank you for having us. Firstly, big shout out to David for Frame.js. I think it's a wonderful tool. I used it a few weeks ago on the hackathon that was done in SF, and that was pretty good. Our experience with building frames is like very recent, so as might be everyone's. But Tom, Jake, and I, we brainstorm on a new tool for building frames called Frog. In general, yes, we do take some different approaches with Frames.js. And as a result, I think that we have the ability to really cover the entire frames market in a complementary way and not in a dumb zero-sum way, because that wouldn't be cool. And maybe I can just give it over to Tom, who can double click on features that are very exciting.
Oh yeah. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a big day for frogs. It's a leap year, so shout out leap year frogs. Yeah, I think really the things that we're focused on are making it really easy to have a good development experience. There's a built-in dev tool whenever you spin it up. I feel like probably the primary use case right now is building standalone frames, but yeah, obviously exploring integrating in with other sites as well. And yeah, another thing that we're really excited about is middleware for Frog. So a dev tool maybe like Naynar or Privy, which allows you to have embedded wallets, can really easily hook into Frog and like be able to inject that stuff into the context for like, querying data or like generating a wallet for, the request users FID and stuff like that. So yeah, who knows where any of this stuff goes anyway. So just like interested in like building cool stuff, and yeah, very interested in transaction support. If anyone knows like VM or WAGMI, those libraries that we build and like the developer experience there, we're really excited about bringing that over for transactions too. So that's the gist.
Nice. Thanks for that great overview, folks. And the third one we have today is from Naynar, who's actually been working on a frame builder to help non-developers also build frames and ship frames easily. And I know Ted's been a big fan and has been shipping a lot of story frames. So Manan or Rish, I don't know if one of you wants to step up, for both of you, and give a quick overview.
Yeah, happy to speak to it quickly. So we started with providing infra for folks like OnChainKit, Frame.js, talking to Frog FM folks later today, where hubs support the calls they make. And then recently we started doing the Frame Studio, where you can make no-code frames, like Varun mentioned. And we are introducing some new updates to that later today, where you'll be able to make no-code frames that allow you to mint hypersubs with warps or other things with warps that so far were only restricted to like Zora mints. So expanding the capabilities there and making it more mobile friendly. It's currently only on desktop. And yesterday we also released a set of APIs where we have done a bunch of work where we make frame rendering and interactions with frames really snappy and smooth. And so now other folks, if you don't want to host your own frame, you can just send us the frame object or the page object, and we'll just return you a frame URL. And you can give that URL to your customers or render it in your app, and we'll handle all the hosting and rendering. So that's also available. And yeah, if you have questions, please reach out.
Great. I don't know if I had a link to Frame Builder on the doc, but if you want to put one in the chat, that might help some folks get there quickly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Manan, do you want to put the link? I'm on my phone.
Sweet. While that's happening, let me just quickly check chat to see if you have any questions. Nope. Okay, we'll keep rolling then. Next up, we have Coinbase giving us a quick overview of mobile wallet protocol. So let's see who we have here from Coinbase. I think we have Jungho.
Yeah.
You want to step up? Maybe you can give us a quick overview.
Okay. Can you hear me? Maybe not.
Yes, we can hear you great.
Yeah, we hear you.
Gotcha. So hi, I'm Jungho from Coinbase. Yeah, it's really great to see the adoption of our mobile wallet protocol. So we built this protocol like quite natively for mobile, and we want to provide a like seamless app to wallet communication experience. So I guess like many of you might be wondering like how this new protocol differs from existing solutions like Wallet Link or Wallet Connect, which relies on some like external relay backend server to provide like WebSocket connection between the app and wallet. While this method works pretty well for desktop dApps to connect to your mobile wallet, there is some like significant difference in the mobile use case. So on mobile devices, communication happens within a single device. You have one device, and your app, the app that you're trying to use, your wallet is on the same device, and it doesn't make much sense to have like you have to rely on some like external server to have like communication between the like internal processes in a single device. And also on mobile devices, as you know, like multitasking is like pretty limited. Typically, you can only use one app at a time. And also when apps are getting backgrounded, their processes easily can get suspended, leading to like lose connection to like WebSocket or like relay servers. So because this is like pretty different from the desktop scenario, we built this whole like new protocol for mobile, which uses deep linking so that we can eliminate the need for any like external entity like relay or bridge servers. So the communications are like truly local and direct between the app and the wallet. And also it's secure with end-to-end encryption, ensuring like authenticity and confidentiality. And also we added some kind of like some optimization for mobile UX as well. It has like batched request type of action so that like you can minimize app switching so that we can enhance the user experience as well. So you can find the implemented like SDK libraries like on all major mobile platforms for like iOS, like CocoaPods, Swift Packet Manager, Maven for Android, and also like for React Native. And we also have some version of Flutter, which needs some like update, but we have we cover all the like major mobile platforms. On top of that, we are also providing the host implementation for this protocol. Like host means like wallet side implementation for this protocol. And this library is also like fully open sourced. Coinbase Wallet also use the like exact same implementation. So we hope that like other wallets could adopt this protocol as well. We can just like try to import our this whole like wallet side implementation. Or yeah, we are happy to work closely with whole like community to make all the like mobile wallet connection better. And it was great to work with Farcaster to like we wanted to have more like better experience for this whole like frame actions. Like we want to have like native like experience. Like when you click something on Farcaster, you just instead of like going into like multiple hops to some like web app redirected to like our in-app browser, we want to show the pop-up right away, and we could do it without too much changes on the protocol. So it's been great to work with Farcaster and happy to see how it goes from now on.
Nice. And this actually is a good segue into talking about frame transactions. But one of the decisions we've made on mobile, after lots and lots of prototyping with Wallet Connect and every form of mobile wallet interaction we could find, we've decided to go with mobile wallet protocol for the first release. But Tony, who's on the call today, actually spent a lot of time on this. And Tony, would love if you could give folks a quick overview of like why we're choosing MWP for this.
Yeah, I think something that makes frames magical is you're in your Farcaster feed and you're just interacting directly. So we wanted to like preserve that really native feel. And so we really wanted to say like, what's the absolute best UX? And like the two things that mobile wallet protocol seem to bring above some of the other like tools out there is one, it's instant because you're using deep links. Like the data is available as soon as the application opens. So that makes it feel really snappy. And then the other thing is it calls back into the app and like you provide the callback URL. So it pops you right back into the app wherever you want to be and the user can just pick up where they left off. So I think like, yeah, when it launches, you'll see that it really feels more native and kind of preserves that like, I'm in my Farcaster feed interacting with the frame. I sign something in my wallet and then I'm back in my feed. So yeah.
Cool. And Jungo, how much like if I'm a wallet, I haven't implemented MWP, what do I need to do to actually get integrated with this and support this today?
Yeah, so we published our spec as well. But also, like as I said, like if your wallet is like React Native based, you can just try to just like import our like host implementation and try to hook it up. If your app is like truly native, I don't think it would take like ton of your resources actually like build it. The spec is like pretty simple, and we already have some implementation in React Native. So I think like anyone can hopefully just like port it over to Swift or Kotlin. We are happy to do that as well. But for now, our focus is more on the updating the like client-side libraries as well. There are some like new ideas that we have to make the like client libraries better, but we want to work closely with the community to like have it more accessible for all the wallets.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Great. With that, we'll jump into the frame transaction spec discussion. So we shared this spec this morning. Horsefax has been doing a lot of the heavy lifting on this spec, and Tony and Goksu, who've been doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the client side and getting all the like end-to-end stuff working. So we're in a pretty good place where I think we have the high level detail, the high level goals like nailed down, and we're like iterating on the minor implementation details on the specification side. And then simultaneously, we're trying to build out the Warcast implementation and give folks as much transparency as possible into how Warcast is going to implement this on day one, so that if you're building frames with transactions, you can have everything ready, tested, and shippable on day 0 when we launch the feature. Okay, let me set some high-level context before I turn it over to other folks to talk through the specific pieces. So one major goal is we want to let people trigger on-chain transactions from frames within Farcaster apps. And then the second goal is we want to minimize risk as much as humanly possible to users interacting with these transactions in their feeds. There's a couple ways we can approach this, right? And it's important to acknowledge one high-level decision that we've made. There's 2 ways you can approach this. One is you can say, hey, I want to allow every possible transaction. And this allows developers maximum creativity. It allows you to like send different kinds of transactions. It allows you to interact with all kinds of smart contracts out there. But it opens up a greater risk surface because you can interact with every contract out there, even malicious ones. There's another approach, which we considered early on, and we actually dug into in pretty great detail, which is a much more conservative approach where you can say, hey, we will, through some set of proxy contracts or something else, actually set up a very limited set of things you can do on chain, i.e. you can only mint NFTs or purchase specific tokens or do things where you can imagine some sort of proxy that enforces that nothing else happens as part of this transaction, and you can launch that on chain and you can limit the scope of what you can do. I think ultimately weighing the pros and cons of both, we liked, like the thing that has really worked with frames is giving developers unconstrained creativity to actually to go and be able to build and create interesting new things. And that's kind of also what makes the blockchain and Ethereum particularly interesting is people have the freedom to go and do new stuff, and it's not a permissioned set of actions. And so while we agree that the security implications are a risk, we're going to take that risk and then we're going to work as hard as possible to mitigate that risk going into this. So that's sort of a high-level decision we've made there. And I want to just see if there's any questions or pushback on that before we get into the implementation, because the implementation derives from this major decision. Everyone's on board? Okay, cool. Horsefax, do you want to give a quick overview of like just the high level of how the frame thing works?
I think DF had a question about the proxy.
Oh, cool. Sorry, my chat isn't scrolling. Oh, whoops. I am way back on my chat. Do you have a draft of what you look at for the proxy? I don't think we got to like a spec level on this one, but if there's any questions you have, happy to answer it at a high level.
I do have a question. Sorry, very quickly. I think the method you described that you didn't go with was one that I think makes a lot of sense because you can avoid all these additional steps for developers. I'm curious, was it just extremely constrained on what people could do, or was there some other reason why you sort of decided that it wasn't the best way to go?
Effectively, the way to think of that approach is you are whitelisting transactions. So you're taking a very, very specific form of transaction and saying, this can have this ETH input and this asset output, and you pass it through a proxy contract that enforces a very narrow set of rules. So you would literally have to, you would literally be building an allow list for trusted transactions and then setting up a series of contracts for each transactions. It would be, the biggest downside is the restrictiveness. You're now not allowing anyone to do it. The second largest downside is it's actually quite time consuming, difficult, and like, moderately centralizing in terms of one party determines what this happens. And the third reason is if we decide this is the right approach, this is actually not a mutually exclusive approach. There's no reason you couldn't layer it onto the existing transaction spec. And you can kind of think of the transaction spec as like open-ended, but potentially untrusted transactions. And you could imagine that there's a narrow set of trusted transactions that someone adds on top that has something different in the UI. Going forward. So for all those reasons, we were like, it feels like the right step to launch this first and then slowly build towards that over time if we think that that's the right decision.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Horsefax, do you want to take it away with the high-level overview?
Sure, yeah, you want to keep driving the doc over here on the left. So this diagram here at a high level is, I think, a good introduction. So unlike some of the existing frame actions that we have so far, which sort of have the data that's necessary for that action hard-coded in the metadata, we're adding kind of an extra layer here of abstraction where rather than embedding the transaction call data or all the details for the transaction directly in your meta tags, instead you're going to point to a URL that will then, the Farcaster client will load the frame. We will post to this URL that you specify in the action to get the call data for the transaction, and then redirect the user to their wallet with that call data. So the idea there is basically these URLs can receive frame messages as post requests. You have access to verify that message, to all the contextual information about that frame message within those endpoints, and you can dynamically generate and return call data to the client that will then forward that onto the wallet. So that enables you as the frame creator to have some control over creating contextual call data, sort of like at runtime. Another benefit here is that you can potentially load that call data from third-party URLs, right? So we as Farcaster might provide an API of farcaster.xyz for certain operations in the Farcaster protocol, like renting storage, registering an FID, stuff like that. And if you trust us to return that call data to you reliably, you can access those URLs and sort of get an intent-like interaction with this call data. Of course, if you're writing a frame yourself, you can serve that call data from your own frame server. And we'll display that in the interaction as originating from your frame server. Yeah, here's an example of this, sort of going through this example of renting storage. Here's what this would look like. So if Alice wants to have her frame rent storage from Farcaster, she might hit a URI like this. That should actually be a target up there where you have data in that tag. Anyways. Yeah, we can look at the transaction format here. So this is the format of returning a transaction as a JSON response. This is going to specify basically everything you need to send an Ethereum transaction. And then we have kind of an envelope in here so that it's extensible to future types of blockchains and different transaction methods. So you'll see a chain ID in there. That's like the CAIP2 chain ID, which is an extensible format for different blockchain chain IDs. We've put a method in there. To start, we're only going to support send transaction on Ethereum. So this will always be an EIP155 chain ID. I think we're deciding which exact L2 chains we're going to support to start. And then method will be ETH send transaction for now, but we anticipate extending this to, say, Solana transactions in the future and different methods within Ethereum transaction types. Inside those params for call data, you'll need to return function signature. This is like the human readable ABI signature of your function. This makes this readable if for human users who are maybe introspecting this data or reading it, and then the call data parameters for the call that you want to make. So the contract to address, the call data, if there's value associated with that, provide that here as well. We have this concept of.
I was going to say, I think Giorgio said something about a task.
Oh, sure.
Oh, I was gonna say I was gonna bike shit around the response format, whether we should remove the word function from the function signature, whether the variable name is necessary. For example, in Foundry, how we define function signatures is that literally you do cast call, function name, open parenthesis, U256, comma, other U256, close parenthesis, open parenthesis, return type, close parenthesis. And that's like much tighter, less verbose. But it trades off some of the copy pasting from Solidity.
Yeah, I think the intent here was like the human readable ABI standard, which I guess is sort of defined by ethers, right? But
yeah,
I would be interested in input from developers on whether this is useful at all to them. We had some feedback in the first spec saying, hey, we should put a human readable attribute in here. I think maybe for many devs, they'll be happy with just the call data because they're working at a low level. So yeah, maybe we'd be interested maybe to take that discussion into the doc.
Right. Yeah, I'm just thinking decoding. Like, we don't want to enter the like kind of terrible world that we've been with wallets historically, where nobody can inspect the human, like, where the wallet is not displaying the preview of the transaction properly. So I'm thinking, okay, what does that mean about contextual information we can show the user to best inform them about the side effects of their transaction?
Yeah.
Yeah, one challenge we have here is like this is not necessarily trustworthy. And so there's a version of the world where it's like you can show this, but you have to sort of mock it with like untrustworthy, or you can do simulation or something else and then have like a marginally more trustworthy model that you can show users. But that I'd be curious to hear your take on this, Georges, but that's kind of what we've been going back and forth on is like, do we just give you the developer oriented, like, hey, execute this call data, it just works? Or do we try to annotate it with something knowing that that annotation might be wrong in an untrusted scenario?
Yeah, maybe opt-in, maybe plug-in, I don't know. And I love the usage of the chain ID, the CIPs, the cap.
Cool. There were two questions, both in chat and also in the previous versions of the spec, about whether we're allowing other signature methods. The short answer is yes, we want to allow other signs. There's a question about personal sign and a question about ETH sign. We will add them as extensions as soon as the spec is out. If someone has really strong feelings and wants to use this immediately, we're also open to just working with you to figure out what that is. But for now, we're planning to launch this first and then go add that in later. There's a second question about multi-step transactions. So, approve and transfer or any of those situations where you need to do multiple steps. Again, not in the V1 of the spec. We wanted to get the single transaction flow working, which is like straightforward with mobile wallet protocol and with Wallet Connect on web, and then kind of come back and revisit how we can get multi-stage transactions executed, because that is a significantly larger bit of complexity with how these things work.
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to do it with multiple frame steps. Not that that's great UX for your frame user. It'd be like the old school, send your ERC20 approval on chain and then go execute your transaction. But yeah, we'll think about that in the future. Okay, so one other thing to call out here is this notion of a domain association. We're actively thinking through these right now, but the idea here is we'll have associations between frame URL. Actually, this probably should become author association, but between the frame URL and the Farcaster identity of who has created that frame, and that allows us to enhance the trust context in certain situations. This is not necessarily a reliable trust signal that you can always trust this domain, right? So you should treat this carefully, both as a user and a developer. But it can allow us to give some contextual information about who created this in certain scenarios. We do need to think about like revocability of these here, but yeah, we have a separate spec that's linked in here somewhere for how these domain associations could work. But the high level idea is this is probably an EIP 191 signature, which is like the ETH sign standard over your FID and your URL of your frame, something like that. So this should hopefully, ideally, the goal there is those are easy to generate for developers, and it's something you can just drop into your frame. But we are revving on this a bit and thinking about exactly how this needs to work.
Yeah. I think on domain associations, we were talking about it this morning. We actually had them in the spec last night. There's still a lot of open questions about like what happens if someone takes over your DNS, et cetera, and a few things we need to think through. So I think, Horseback's correct me if I'm wrong, I think the likely version is we will probably ship V1 without domain associations in the spec, and then separately work on that spec and come and layer this on in a few weeks once we have ironed out all the edge cases of that.
Yep, I think this is optional in the types that are defined below, so you may not want to include this just yet.
I'll touch a little on the security considerations that folks have raised. So just broadly thinking about the classes of attacks that are likely going to happen once we launch frames, you're going to have phishing frames, which say, hey, click here to get free NFT, and just naively loads like a wallet drainer or some other form of transaction that you don't want to execute into your wallet and hopes you'll click through. There's a slightly more sophisticated spoofing attack where you like create something that looks legitimate, like you create a fake WBTC token and then you have users execute it. And even when you look at it on, like, it looks like it's coming from Uniswap because Uniswap holds the call data, and then you click on it and you get tricked into buying something that's worthless. There's even more subtle ones like authorization exploits. For example, you could do this with Farcaster, where you could say, hey, here's a frame that lets you set your recovery address, but instead it sets the frame author as the recovery address when you execute the transaction. And that starts to get like dangerous. And then the last one, it's a little bit harder and sort of outside the scope of this thing, but you can actually hijack a frame's domain and return malicious call data. So the frame was working fine until yesterday, but today it's starting to return something malicious. And I think the thing that we want to be transparent about is, just like with wallets, there's no deterministic way to protect a user from all of these attacks, but there are a bunch of strategies that clients can and should use to minimize the impact of all of this stuff. I think what's worked well for wallets has been public allow list and ban list. There's a lot of great stuff that's been built out there. We're going to build on some of that and have our own version of these lists. Transaction simulation, again, not a panacea, but for a whole class of attacks can make it much, much harder for people to slip that by users without them noticing. 3, something kind of unique to Farcaster is we also have social graph data. So you can see who is following this person, who is vouched for this person, and you can see your relationship to this person, where the person is either the person who shared the frame or who authored the frame, which can be very useful for users to determine if something is trustworthy. And then the last one is also like educating users about best practices, which I think we as clients are going to take the onus on us to go do and teach people like, hey, probably don't send this straight to your wallet that has all your funds on it. It's probably a good idea to make a separate wallet with a small amount of money to use for frame transactions on day one and keep this sort of isolated from your main wallet, and teaching people about best practices like that. Want to talk quick? Sorry,
yeah, I guess I'd say here, like, this is pretty similar to the conventional dApp security model, right? If you're on an external domain and interacting with an app, these are the same security considerations you often have in that context. The difference now is that it's in your Farcaster feed. So I want developers and users to be clear on that like that is the same trust model, and there's not necessarily anything magic about the Farcaster frame model that makes changes that security model. So you need to be thinking about the same sort of things as when you're interacting with any dApp.
And maybe just if I can add philosophically, I think fundamentally, Varun said this before, we want to allow developers to have creative freedom, because I think that is what has made frames successful thus far. It's driven growth for the Farcaster protocol. And if we worry too much about like trying to mitigate everything, A, you could just never do that unless you got like super restrictive. And B, I think a smart iterative approach where we kind of take a bunch of stuff at the client level with Warcast, given that's a lot of the distribution, and then continue to iterate with this standard to the point that maybe the proxy stuff ends up happening for kind of like 5 or 6 really core actions. And you could put like a check mark around trust there that you feel really good. I think that is the right approach to build this versus getting too restrictive early on. And then you kind of lose some of that momentum that naturally will happen when all of the great developers on Farcaster finally have this ability to kind of use the creative freedom of transactions.
I think Sheldon had a question.
Hey, yeah, and I really appreciate you guys pushing to get this out pretty quick. One thing I had was around like having ECDSA signatures or something with account abstraction, like in its first version, just because I think it'll help for user experience to make it a lot cheaper for people as well.
Cool. Yeah, we're open to it. If you want to DM one or both of us, we can talk about like how we would add this to the spec. If you have particular thoughts on like what we'd need to change, we're happy to consider that and support. Sweet. There's also a proposal for attribution here, and there's already been a bunch of good comments on it, which we'll respond to after this meeting. But the general idea is that we encourage appending a bit of call data to the end of the transactions to A, attribute back to this was generated by a Farcaster frame, and then B, this was generated by this particular client. There's actually an extension at the bottom of the spec that proposes adding also beyond this potentially other things like the frame author, the user who recasted the frame, and other things. So a contract can actually know what the true source of this transaction was and be able to attribute where all of the demand is coming from, which is very useful for people to figure out where users are discovering their contracts. So the initial version is going to be very simple. It's just got a client FID and it's derives from the seaport order attributions. But a future version might actually have a lot more optional properties that we add on here to make this more useful to folks. Okay, the next part is the more technical specification. I won't step through this in detail, but this is the like nuts and bolts of exactly how the implementation works and exactly how the properties work, etc. If you had feedback on this, please leave comments. We can talk about it or post in chat. And if we get through the spec and we have time, we can come back and discuss this. But I want to make sure people are brought in on the high level pieces first. Scrolling down to the bottom, I think what we want to talk about a little bit is the Warcast implementation, and particularly get feedback from all the developers about how we're going to roll this out. Because what we're not going to do is turn everything on day one and just kind of see if it works. We want to take sort of this progressive approach where we take a few days to get everything lined up and get everything shipped so that developers have time to get their frames ready. But also we have reasonable confidence that all of these security checks that we put in place are working as expected and nothing sort of gets out of control. Like one of the most important things we want to make sure is like on day 1, day 2, day 3, there are no like crazy attacks, crazy exploits that happen, and we have like good controls to rein in any malicious frames that happen to be shipped. And so we'll actually share mockups in this soon. I think Achal and other folks on the team are working on this right now. But the general idea is that like the very first time you interact with a frame, you'll get an educational model that tells you something about like how frame transactions work, what's safe, what's not safe, how you should think about setting up your wallet to work with it. That's a one-time thing that every user will see. Frame buttons will have a special icon. And we actually encourage all clients to use the same icon, and we're going to share it as an open SVG, but Warcast will definitely be using this icon. So everybody knows when I'm looking at a frame and I see this button and I click on this, this is going to trigger a transaction. And so you're not surprised when it takes you to a wallet. A third thing is Warcast is going to show warnings if the frame is being shared from an untrusted source or untrusted domain. There's a couple of like details I'll get into about how we figure that out. And then finally, on web, we use RainbowKit and send you to the wallet of your choice. And on mobile, we use Mobile Wallet Protocol and send you to the wallet of your choice. And so we already talked about Mobile Wallet Protocol at the beginning of this call, so I kind of won't recap all of that. If anyone has any questions, feel free to post in chat. And the web implementation with RainbowKit is pretty vanilla and straightforward in how we use RainbowKit to let you use Wallet Connect or QR code scanning or any of these other methods to get to the wallet of your choice. Any questions on that before I jump into the timeline and some of the specifics around how we're thinking about warning exceptions and domain lists? Sheldon?
Yes, on the wallet side, would the person or the user have to have that address that's connected to their wallet, connected to their Farcaster account as well, or is that separate?
No, in theory, you can use whatever address you like. And the wallet experiences diverge from this a little bit. So like sometimes you open it, the wallet just lets you choose one. Sometimes you get to flip back and forth and you can change your address in the wallet before you execute the transaction. We have a question from Sinara.
Yeah, hi guys. So is the signing flow, redirection flow just one step? So basically you just redirect and then sign. You don't need to do the typical connection.
So it's going to be slightly different on web and mobile. On mobile, there's going to be a connect step the very first time you interact with Coinbase Wallet, and then you're going to be sent back to the app, and then you will be sent back, and then you can execute your transaction. Once you've connected your wallet, that connection actually persists for a while. I think it's about a week now, and we're talking about extending it to a month. There's actually a future design we've been talking to Junho about where we can actually, instead of having a connect step, Warcast can send a signed message that actually lets them trust the originator of this transaction. And then we'll have the really amazing UX of no signing step needed at all. But that is probably like, call it a month away because Coinbase Wallet needs to ship some improvements before we can call that SDK and make that happen. And all the users need to update to the latest version of the wallet as well, which takes some time.
I see. The reason I'm asking, I really like how sign with Farcaster works. The flow is very nice because it's just one step. And earlier I was also asking if we can make sign with Ethereum with one step. And I'm just hoping maybe guys, with what you guys doing, maybe in future we'll be able to do that for sign with Ethereum as well. Where, as you said, like you already have this pre-connection, and then you can just send the sign with Ethereum and not have the two steps.
Yeah, I think Horsefax did a great job on the sign in with Farcaster model, and I think we feel pretty good, and I think Coinbase is also excited about doing this, about getting to a world where you have like one-step transactions, which don't compromise or don't add any risk to the user, but make the user experience a lot better and a lot simpler. And then to answer your question on web is just, for now, web will use the standard RainbowKit, which means there is a connect and sign flow, and it's going to look a little more like your traditional flow. I think it tends to be easier to do this stuff on web, so we're prioritizing the mobile experience first, partially because 80% of Warcast users are on mobile right now, but eventually we'll also try to make the web experience better, and getting transactions feeling really, really good, simple, easy, and understandable is one of our goals. Okay. Looking at the chat for questions, do you think about a web app inside Warcast, a little pop-up or iframe which opens the target website instance after a click on a button? We have on web probably like a little bit of a modal flow. So again, we'll have UI mockups later today, which might feel very similar to what you're describing. So when you click on a transaction, you get a little window. If you're using a wallet that doesn't do transaction simulation, we will actually like do the transaction simulation for you and say, here you go, here's kind of what this transaction is going to do, and then let you segue into the wallet and execute and complete your transaction there. Web is a little trickier because as soon as you start pushing something to a wallet, the experience diverges wildly. Like you can send it to a mobile wallet, you can do it with an extension, you can send it to a browser window. And so we sort of have some control up until this point. And then after this, it's a little bit of Wild West in terms of what happens next. Cool. Want to talk about timeline really quickly. So we haven't announced the launch day yet. We're still working internally. A, we want to get the spec and all the comments addressed and make sure we feel good about this. And again, it feels like we're getting very close. B, we also need to know when Warcast is ready to launch, and we're still grinding through the last few pieces of the implementation. But let's say we pick a day, T0, that's going to be our launch day. We want to get to code complete a couple days before that. And then we want to create internally a test transaction frame that we broadcast and that people can do. Maybe it'll be like a sample mint or something. So we can just test and make sure that it works and get the mileage on all the different wallets. A day after that, we're going to let people get on the allow list for trusted domains. And I'll talk about what that means in a second, but you'll have a process where you can apply, and we'll try to get as many folks in as possible. Our goal here is to keep out like obvious malicious sites and let anyone who's been, a longstanding user in the Farcaster community be able to have a trusted status. And then we'll have like a launch day where we launch frame transactions on L2s. And the reason we want to start with L2s is A, the majority of Farcaster activity happens on L2s anyway. And B, people have the ratio of financial assets on L1 to L2 is typically very skewed in the favor of L1s. And so starting with L2s only means that you're not going to get tricked into like signing away something very valuable on L1. And we'll bring in L1 later. We just want to give it a few weeks on the L2s to see how things are going. And plan is to launch with as many as possible. So we'll have base, OP, mainnet. We're looking at Zora. There are some issues with transaction scanning and a few other providers with Zora that we're working through. We're hoping to have it on launch day, but there's a chance it gets delayed by a few days. Cool. Any questions on that before I get into the allow listing? Sheldon, you had a question?
Yeah, so it's more so on the connected wallet side of it. So like when the person connects the wallet, let's say they pick a different address that's not one of the ones that they have as their connected wallet. How does the dApp or the frame know which place to send the assets to? Because they're essentially signing and initiating a transaction from one wallet, but it's not the one that you already connected. So is it possible for like you to have like a list in the actual user's account to have them so we know what address they have, I guess?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So what we're thinking about doing for the V1 is saying, hey, you can send a transaction and the user can execute it. And that transaction does everything, right? That transaction allows the user to get whatever asset they're trying to get and put it into the wallet of their choice. And the frame basically has no say in terms of like restricting it to some address. You can kind of look at the user and say, I will now let you execute this transaction, but you can't limit it to a certain address in this V1. In V2, we want to go and explore the possibility of saying, hey, can we actually introduce an address restriction where you can produce a transaction that say you must put it to this address, or at least we encourage you to execute the transaction to this address and not to any other address. There's a lot of edge cases with how wallets let users switch addresses and how RainbowKit does that we'd have to work through. So it's not a trivial piece of work, but it's something we're going to look into because I think it's something that developers want the flexibility to do. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Cool. Okay, so domain allow list. So we want to operate a sort of public domain allow list. The idea is it'll be on GitHub and there'll be a PR process where you can get added. The process to get added is going to be pretty lightweight. This is definitely not a trust anything that this domain sends, but is more of a, this is definitely not a 100% malicious actor. So it's sort of a lightweight trust signal that we can apply, and that's going to be useful. And the idea is that if you get a transaction from a frame that's not on the allow list, it will have some indicator that says, hey, this might be an untrusted source. Do your own research before you agree. And if you are on the trusted allow list, we may not show that particular warning to users. We'll just rely on the initial education to get users set up. And the requirements are going to be very simple to start. You must have a domain that has something on it. So if we visit the domain, it already has a frame or it already has a website. It's not like a net new thing where we don't know what it's going to be. We won't allow list like third domains that let other third parties deploy code, because obviously that's not trustworthy. So like Vercel, for example, we're not going to go and like allow list all of Vercel because you can deploy anything to Vercel. But if you have an app and you get a domain for it that's specific, we're happy to allow list your app. And then there's also some element of subjective judgment by the Warcast team where we take a look at it and we say, okay, this seems reasonably legit. Let's approve this versus not. Not a perfect process, not going to stop everything, but we want to start here, see what this helps with in the initial transaction days, and then iterate from there as we go. We had a question from the group.
Does it propagate to all the subdomains or just a specific one? Let's say I have API.domain and then I have like app. So my app is on Vercel, but API is on, let's say, another provider, which is not controlled by Vercel.
It's a good question. We haven't actually like discussed internally and finalized on that answer yet. I'm curious if you have a POV on what you'd want it to be.
Sorry, can you repeat again?
Oh, I said we haven't finalized on that yet. I'm curious if you have a strong opinion on whether it should be domain or subdomain.
I think it just should be subdomain because a lot of people have a lot of different services running on different providers. So like some, like for me, some are on the Vercel, but the frame I run on GCP, and so at least it would work. In my case, it would work if it was a subdomain based.
Cool. I know we're a little over time, but I think we have a couple more things, so I'll just keep going and folks can feel free to stay. There's a question on whether deploying the AWS would count as third party. We really care about the domain, not about whatever infrastructure you use underneath. So it's really about like, are we okay approving this large domain as the thing that is okay for you to serve frames from, and go from there. Guessing that domains that serve dynamic third-party transactions as a service will not be eligible on the domain allow list, but wanted to confirm. It's a great question. I think it's something we have to think about. There's a version of the world where you say, hey, we're underwriting that this, it really depends on like what that website's purpose is. And we might actually literally have to talk to them and say, hey, if you're doing some kind of process where you are reviewing, allow listing, and then sharing these transactions, and you are like, hey, this is structured, I'm willing to vouch for this, and we're willing to vouch for you, that makes sense. If you have a website where anyone can come and upload call data and it generates URLs, that probably doesn't make sense to auto approve and say this is trusted because, you know, it could literally be anything. So I think this will be more of a judgment based on what the purpose of the site is and what it allows its users to do. Cool. Second thing we're going to have is reporting. So there's going to be a button for users to report malicious frames, and we'll have some heuristic that, you know, if you get more than X reports in some time period from known good users, then the frame will just be put into pause mode, and then we will have an internal dashboard where we go and review it, and once we approve it, it can be interacted with again. If we do find that something is actually malicious, we will actually publish it to a block list or a ban list that actually goes up on the domain. We'll try to make that public over GitHub. I don't think the ban list is going to be like super effective because it's kind of trivial for someone to deploy a frame to a new Vercel domain and get a new URL. So we're not sure if that will actually be super meaningful, but we're happy to make it public and see if it's useful. I think it will be useful in the short run where the moment we detect a frame from a bunch of reports, that data might be useful to other clients to quickly pick it up. So we're happy to expose that over an API once we think that we have the heuristics kind of dialed in. And then finally, we also want to like focus on allow listing users as well. This is a little bit more of an experimental idea where in addition to the domain, we'll actually say like, hey, you as a user, if you've been a known good user of Farcaster, you know, if your account's been older than so many months, you've been posting, et cetera, you get this. If you signed up yesterday, you have 20 followers and you post a frame with a transaction, there's going to be a warning button that says, hey, you know, do your own research before doing this. Again, we're not going to stop anyone from broadcasting a transaction until it's clearly malicious or reported by peers. But we are going to show more of a warning for unknown accounts. And the way we're probably going to do it to start is a manual review process. So we'll have everyone, you can add a switch and you can apply. Dan and I will literally look at these accounts and go like, hey, we recognize these folks, let's approve it. And over time, once we've had some of that data, we can start coming up with heuristics and say like, okay, account age, account following, all of these stats that we put together that are hard to game. And then we can actually make this more of an automated process where you automatically get into this. And then the manual application is the exception, not the rule. Okay, there have been a few questions in chat, so let me scroll up and catch back onto this. Will Warcast enable geofencing? So we are not going to be executing the transactions themselves. We're going to be sending them to the wallet. So wallets are going to be handling any execution of the transaction, and wallets control, wherever the wallet is available, wherever you can download from the App Store. That's how the geofencing works. So I think this is more of a question for the wallet than it is for the client. Not sure I fully understand not allowing domain that has third parties to deploy code. Sorry, to be very specific, I think this is aimed at if you have a deployer site like Vercel, or you have a site that's like, hey, I allow anybody to log in and put in like arbitrary code, like a developer, make it really, really easy for somebody to inject code into your domain that you own and control, then we're going to be less likely to say, hey, this is a trusted frame, because tomorrow someone can just come in, trusted domain, because tomorrow someone can just come in and add code and have that show up in the domain. If you have a domain that you control, that's your product, like Bountycaster, that you deploy to, then that is trusted. Like, Horsefacts can't show up tomorrow and deploy code to that domain without your permission. So we feel pretty good about that. Does that distinction make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Cool. Would be nice to have contract deployers and owners to publish some kind of message that they own the frame endpoint. Yeah, this is actually an idea. The general idea of attribution from contract to Farcaster ID to frame to domain is something that we're thinking a lot about, and we have some proposals. We haven't gotten any to the point where we're like, yes, this makes sense, and this is actually like totally dialed in. But that's some of the things that Horsefacts has been thinking a lot about. Cool. Domain mapping. Have you thought of using ENS, DNSSEC? Horsefacts, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's talk about it.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, we've been thinking about how we can embed like signatures and metadata and things based on that. But yeah, I think there's a good layer there that we could potentially layer on here. So thank you for that suggestion.
Sweet. All right. I think we're out of time. I will leave the floor open for any last questions that people have. If you have anything that you haven't had the chance to ask, and now is the time to ask it, or we'll see you all again 2 weeks from now. Great. I know we didn't get through some of that. Oh, we do have one question.
Sorry.
Mon, if you want to step up.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, nice. I just had I had that question about geofencing. And I was just curious, I just want to elaborate. So will Warcast or like Farcaster, I guess Warcast specifically, not enable or have plans for sort of like geofencing certain users in certain places and restrict them, or give that information available to restrict them?
So I guess I'll separate like Warcast availability and where we are available from transaction execution, which I think is in the domain of the wallet. So Warcast availability, we require Apple Pay. So I believe by extension, Apple doesn't distribute our app in a bunch of regions where Apple Pay is requested, and Google also similarly. So there's sort of a default, like we're allowed in certain regions, we're not allowed in certain regions based on the permissions that we request from the App Store. Secondly, if you have the app and you're executing a transaction, we don't necessarily do any further checking. You can think of us as like a link. The developer puts a link on there, you click on the link, we send the link to your wallet, and you can execute the wallet, and that's roughly how that model works. There's no way for a frame developer to say, I only want this to show up to users in the US. I don't want this to show up to users in the UK. If you're able to get the Warcast app, which is sort of everyone that the App Store has allowed us to distribute the app to, all of those users are going to be able to see your frame and send your frame transaction to the wallet of their choice.
Okay. So yeah, you guys don't plan to sort of enable geofencing on Warcast?
What's the use case you're thinking about geofencing for?
Well, like certain like US users aren't allowed to use certain dApps, right? And so if they do set up frames and we want to comply with legal rules, they would have to, Warcast would have to enable some way for geofencing against users that are not allowed to use those frames.
I think it's an interesting point. Let Varun and myself kind of like link up on that and think through it. I think one challenge is that obviously Warcast is only one client amongst many. So then you kind of have this broader kind of protocol based solution. Yeah. And I think that there's a second component where we're a social media app, if you think about it. And so like KYCing every user is not a current requirement, at least in the US for social media relative to something like Coinbase. But I think I understand the kind of like frame, it's the wrong word to use. I understand the question here, and let us kind of think about it offline and come back.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for coming today. We will see you all here in 2 weeks, and the recording will be up on YouTube soon.